NASA just unveiled plans for a permanent lunar base near the moon's south pole, habitats, rovers, cargo systems, eventually rotating crews living and working on the moon, just like Antarctica. It's exciting, ambitious. It's the kind of vision that makes space exploration feel genuinely aspirational again. But here's what history teaches us. Not every NASA plan becomes a reality. For every Apollo 11 that launches, there's a mission that never leaves the drawing board. For every rover that lands on Mars, there's a spacecraft that never got built. The gap between what NASA imagined and what NASA actually accomplished is sometimes as interesting as the accomplishments themselves. I'm Keith Conrad, and this is Sidequests. Today, NASA's lost futures. The ambitious plans, the detailed mission studies, the spacecraft that engineers designed and tested but never got to fly, the destinations humanity was supposed to reach by now but didn't, the remarkable places we thought we'd already be. In 1967, Apollo 11 wouldn't land on the moon for another 2 years, but NASA was already thinking about the next giant leap. What comes after the moon? One's proposal was genuinely serious, a manned Venus flyby. The concept was straightforward. In the mid-1970s, just a few years before Apollo, NASA would launch astronauts on a trajectory that would take them around Venus and back to Earth. A year-long mission, farther than any humans had ever traveled, and farther than humans have traveled since. This wasn't fantasy. NASA engineers produced detailed mission studies. They had serious designs. They knew how to do it. The mission would have used modified Apollo hardware. The same command and service module that took astronauts to the moon could be adapted for the Venus flyby. The Saturn V rocket that lifted Apollo to the moon could launch the Venus mission. The technology already existed and the expertise was there. At the time, NASA had the budget. After Apollo, there was momentum, there was funding, there was institutional confidence, and it was a nice middle ground between Apollo as it existed and going to Mars, which was the eventual destination. Venus was closer in terms of orbital mechanics, so it was a little bit easier trip to make. But then the budget collapsed. NASA had cost $280 billion in today's money, an enormous commitment. By the early 1970s, public enthusiasm for space exploration had waned. Congress wasn't interested in funding increasingly ambitious missions. NASA's budget was slashed. The grand plans of the late 60s were basically abandoned. The Venus flyby never happened. No humans have ever gone to Venus. No humans have ever come as close to attempting it as they did in those few years when NASA was imagining what to do after Apollo. It's a fascinating counterfactual. If funding had continued, if public support had held, if the political will had remained, human beings might have orbited Venus in the 70s. Instead, we never did. For the next 5 decades, Venus remained unvisited by humans, at least, to this day. The most ambitious early follow-up to Apollo, a genuine attempt to extend human spaceflight beyond the moon, exists only in mission studies and engineering drawings. A future that almost happened, a destination that remained unreached because of budget cuts and shifting priorities. America's first space station, Skylab, launched in May 1973. It was a triumph of engineering and improvisation. NASA had taken a Saturn V stage and converted it into an orbital workshop. Astronauts lived there, conducted experiments, maintained it as a functioning space habitat. But Skylab had a problem. It was losing altitude. Without active propulsion, orbital decay was inevitable. Eventually, it would re-enter Earth's atmosphere and burn up, possibly even impact on the surface. NASA had a leftover Apollo spacecraft and Saturn rocket they had in reserve if something had gone wrong on one of the manned Skylab missions, and they had to send up a rescue mission. There was also still enough air and water up there on Skylab to easily support a short crewed mission to boost it into an orbit that would keep it up there long enough to come up with a more permanent fix once the space shuttle was up and running. All they had to do was bring up a couple dozen bagged lunches for a 20-day mission. Congress, however, didn't love the idea of appropriating money to revive mothballed Apollo hardware for one more mission, so NASA had to cross that idea off the list. Of course, the space shuttle would be capable of reaching Skylab. Astronauts could dock with the station and attach a propulsion package that would reboost Skylab into a higher orbit. The station could be maintained, could be visited again, could potentially evolve into something permanent. It was a good plan. The shuttle could stay Skylab. But the shuttle was delayed. Development took longer than expected. Testing revealed problems, especially with the heat shield. The program faced technical challenges. Skylab, meanwhile, was not delaying its orbital decay. Physics doesn't worry about schedules. In July of 1979, Skylab re-entered Earth's atmosphere, broke apart. Some debris impacted the Indian Ocean, some scattered across Western Australia. They actually sent us a bill for littering. The space station that NASA had hoped to preserve and extend came apart over the southern hemisphere. The shuttle, which could have saved Skylab, finally launched in 1981, fortunately 2 years too late. This is one of spaceflight's near misses. Had the shuttle launched on schedule, Skylab might have remained in orbit long enough to become part of a permanent American space station program. The continuum between Skylab and the eventual International Space Station might have been unbroken. Instead, NASA had to start over. Years without a space station, years of conceptual designs and proposals, eventually leading to the ISS, which is remarkable in its own right, but it's not the direct continuation that might have been possible if they'd been able to revive Skylab. After last week's announcement, everybody knows about NASA's moon-based plans for the Artemis program, the lunar South Pole base, permanent human presence on the moon. But here's what's fascinating. The first serious American moon-based proposal predates Apollo and Kennedy's moonshot. It comes from the 1950s. It was called Project Horizon, and it was proposed by the U.S. Army. In 1959, the Army Corps of Engineers published a detailed technical report outlining a concept for a military lunar outpost. The goals included permanent crew rotations, dozens of personnel, scientific operations, strategic military advantages. The Army imagined a functioning moon base by the mid-1960s. The Army detailed how it could actually work, how supplies could be delivered, the base would be maintained, how many people would live there, what they would actually do. The technology already existed or could be developed relatively quickly. Using Saturn V rockets, which were already being developed at the time, you could send supplies and personnel to the moon. You could establish a foothold and make it permanent. Why did it fail? A continuing theme here: cost. The estimates were enormous, even by 1950s standards. The project would require massive funding commitments and sustained political support. There were also technological limitations. Some of the engineering challenges were a little harder than anticipated. NASA's rise as a civilian space agency also didn't help. When NASA was created in 1958 and given responsibility for civilian space exploration, the Army's role diminished. NASA absorbed the civilian lunar ambitions, and military proposals just faded out. Political support completely disappeared. Once Kennedy set the goal of landing on the moon, a civilian achievement in a space race context, there was just no political appetite for a military moon base. So Project Horizon was shelved. The military's detailed plans for a permanent moon base were filed away. They became footnotes in spaceflight history. It's remarkable because it shows how serious people were about going to the moon and how early it was. The Army believed it was achievable in the 60s. They proposed it in 1959. They had detailed plans. Instead, it took until 1969 for anyone to land on the moon, and no permanent base exists to this day, more than 50 years later. In the 1960s and 70s, NASA and the Atomic Energy Commission developed a technology called NERVA, nuclear engines for rocket vehicle applications. The concept was elegant: use a nuclear reactor as the heat source for a rocket engine. The reactor heats propellant, liquid hydrogen, to extreme temperatures, creating superior specific impulse, more efficient than chemical rockets, more powerful for deep space missions. Unlike many ambitious space concepts, NERVA actually worked. Engineers built it, tested it, ground tests were successful, the technology worked. With NERVA engines, mission planners could envision permanent lunar bases, large space stations, human missions to Mars. Some NASA studies from the 70s imagine astronauts reaching Mars in the 80s. Not as science fiction, it was serious mission planning, with Nerva engines providing the necessary propulsions. Mars could be reached, humans could land, and they could come back. The 1980s moon landing was genuinely discussed in NASA studies. It was seen as achievable with the right funding and political support. So why did it end? Apollo funding cuts eliminated the resources for continued Nerva development. Without an approved Mars program to justify the expense, Nerva couldn't be sustained. Political priorities shifted, interest in human spaceflight to distant targets waned. Nerva was canceled in 1973, along with a lot of other projects. But here's what's remarkable. Unlike many canceled concepts, Nerva wasn't abandoned because it didn't work. It was abandoned for political and budgetary reasons. The technology was functional, the engineering was sound. Humans could have gone to Mars in the 80s if Nerva had continued development and if funding had been allocated. Instead, Nerva remains in history as a might have been, a technology that worked but was never used, a path to Mars that existed but wasn't taken. Before NASA even existed, before the space age officially began, Wernher von Braun was imagining human missions to Mars. Von Braun was a visionary. He understood rockets better than almost anyone alive. He had designed the V-2 for Nazi Germany. After the war, he brought his expertise to the U.S. He became the chief architect of the Saturn V rocket that sent Americans to the moon, but Mars was always in the back of his mind. Von Braun proposed enormous flotillas of spacecraft traveling to Mars, multiple massive vehicles, hundreds of personnel, rotating crews. He imagined Mars settlements, permanent human presence on Mars. Later, NASA's studies became more realistic, but remained ambitious. A Mars mission would require enormous expenses, multiple Saturn V launches, complex orbital mechanics, months of transit time, risks that were just enormous. But it was possible. The technology, or at least the pathway to develop the technology, was there. Common theme across all these lost missions, they assumed Apollo-level funding would continue indefinitely. They assumed that public enthusiasm for spaceflight would sustain expensive and ambitious programs. They assumed that if you could imagine it, Congress would write a check. Unfortunately, none of those assumptions held true. The biggest obstacle to human Mars exploration wasn't technology. Wernher von Braun understood the engineering. NASA engineers could have done it. The obstacle was politics and budgets and changing priorities. After Apollo, Congress wasn't interested in spending the money. The public moved on to other concerns. The political will to fund ambitious space exploration just evaporated. So the Mars mission that von Braun envisioned and that NASA engineers planned remained on paper, blueprints of futures that just never happened. So maybe NASA's big plans for a moon base happen this time. Maybe it evolves into something different. Maybe budget cuts force it to be canceled or dramatically reduced. Maybe it joins the long list of unrealized NASA plans, ambitious visions that just never came to fruition. History suggests we should be cautiously optimistic. NASA has done remarkable things. Apollo was real, Mars rovers are real, the International Space Station is real. But spaceflight history is also a graveyard of unrealized ambitions. Venus flybys that never launched, space stations that fell from orbit, moon bases that were detailed in engineering drawings but never actually built, Mars missions that were planned for but never funded. The history of spaceflight isn't just a story of the missions that launched, it's also a story of the futures people imagined, the destinations they thought humanity would have reached by now, the remarkable places we were supposed to already be. We're still not on Mars, we never went to Venus, we didn't establish a permanent moon base in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, aughts. We're still waiting for the futures that NASA and its engineers imagined decades ago. Maybe the new lunar base will be different, maybe it'll actually happen. Maybe it'll be the beginning of sustained human presence on the moon, leading to Mars, leading to places we can't even imagine right now. Or maybe in 50 years it'll be another footnote in the history of lost NASA futures, another ambitious plan, another destination remained unreached. We'll just have to wait and see.